Welcome to Pennsylvania in Focus. I'm Kristen Smith. By commuting the sentences of 1,500 people who were released to home confinement during the onslaught of the COVID-19 pandemic, President Joe Biden drew the ire of many Pennsylvanians who were affected by what became known as the Kids for Cash scandal in Luzerne County. That's because he granted clemency to one of the judges convicted in the scheme. Joining me today is the Center Square's Pennsylvania reporter, Christina Lingel. Christina, who is Michael Conahan and what is Kids for Cash?
So Michael Conahan was a judge in Luzerne County, and basically Kids for Cash involved him and another judge accepting kickbacks from a private company that ran 2 juvenile detention centers in the area. So basically, a lot of people were sent to those centers who might otherwise not have really had that stiff of a sentence. For instance, one of the more famous cases was someone who was sentenced by the other judge to serve time, and his mother said he was never the same after that. And a few years later, he died by suicide. But his offense was just a minor drug paraphernalia possession charge. So we are seeing kids being charged with things like vandalism or other things that you would expect to have a pretty lenient response, and that was not the case.
What impact did the judge's scheme have on the kids who got caught up in it?
It was really negative. So in general, Pennsylvania has been struggling with its juvenile justice system and the conditions of detention centers. A lot of neglect and abuse is happening there. So it is a pretty negative impact on the mental health and the long-term trajectory of kids who get sent there. So obviously, that had an impact on them just being there, but the downstream effects in terms of career and just the opportunities that they miss out on from having been in that position, it's kind of impossible to estimate.
And what are lawmakers and advocates saying about this clemency decision?
Senator Lisa Baker is one of the people in Pennsylvania who spoke out pretty upset by this decision. There wasn't a lot of time left on his sentence, and he had been serving his sentence from home since the pandemic sent a lot of prisoners who they were safe to go back into their communities to complete their sentences at home. But nonetheless, a lot of kids lost years of their lives and, had all of these untold damages. So people think it's not really fair to see him get the leniency that he was not offering to the juveniles entrusted to his judgment. On the other hand, people who advocate for reform are advocating for it across the board, no matter what the circumstances. So if the system in which people are placed is cruel or unfair, then clemency for anyone would be appreciated as long as there is actual rehabilitation taking place. So the response of the Juvenile Law Center, who had a big hand to play in the Kids for Cash, in exposing the Kids for Cash scandal and bringing them to justice, they actually said they support President Biden's decision, but they hope that, that kind of clemency would be granted to the many other people who are being negatively impacted by the criminal justice system.
There was a task force report a few years ago about how to improve this situation. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the recommendations that advocates would like to see implemented?
So one big one would be to minimize the amount of out-of-home placements for kids. A lot of kids are getting placed out of home for first-time offenses, and it has a huge impact on the family and a huge impact on the child. So that's something people want to push for. Making sure that juveniles aren't tried as adults for certain crimes, and they've actually had to close certain centers because of the treatment and neglect occurring there. So they are working on it, but there are a lot of reforms that have been proposed that have not yet been taken up by the legislature.
Christina, thanks for joining us today. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com.